You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And this is my annual Best Albums of the Year episode. I'm excited to share what I believe to be the 9 best albums released in 2022. I listened to over 700 hours of music to narrow down this list. So I truly believe that these albums are worthy of your time and attention. I'd like to start by sharing the system that I have in place to keep track of what albums are released, what I've listened to, and what eventually ends up on this list. So at the start of every year, I open a browser on my phone, I go to Wikipedia, and I find the list of albums being released that year. So in this case, list of 2022 albums. Then every Friday, which is the day that most new albums get released, I check out that list. There'll be 10, 15, 20 new albums. I then head over to Spotify, where I have a playlist called New Albums 2022. So any album from any band that I actually have heard of, I move over to the Spotify list. There'll be maybe 5 to 7 albums. And those are the albums that I listen to for the week ahead. Now, I also have a second Spotify list called Best Albums of 2022. So any of the albums that I listen to that impress me, I move over to that second playlist. So I listen to those albums throughout the year, and those that stand the test of time will still be there on the Best Albums of 2022 list. And there are a few other things that I do to make sure that there aren't any great albums that fall through the cracks. So one thing I do is I frequently check out Metacritic. So if you're not familiar with Metacritic, they take all the professional reviews for an album and they give it an average score. So if an album has a high average score on Metacritic, that shows it has universal acclaim and that critics are loving it. So that's a good place to start for albums from bands or artists that I've never heard of. The last thing I do to make sure that I don't miss out on any great albums from artists that I haven't heard of is near the end of the year, I check out the Best Albums of the Year list from other organizations. So around November, December, you'll see Billboard, Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, NPR, Metacritic. You'll see them all release their Best Albums of the Year list. And that's a great place for me to check out and make sure that I'm not missing anything. And now that you know the system that I have in place to discover great music every year, let's dive into the best albums of 2022. The first great album that I heard in 2022 was Billy Talent's Crisis of Faith. Now, despite the band having been super successful since like 2003, this is the first time that they release an album where the first 3 singles all went to #1 at rock radio. And the single End of Me actually topped the charts for 12 weeks, making it their longest running #1 single from their entire career. And I have a confession. End of Me was actually my most played song of the year on Spotify. So the album kicks off with the song Forgiveness 1 and 2, which is this like wild prog rock song that has crazy guitar riffs and time signatures. And then about 2/3 of the way through the song, it changes into this slower, groovy Pink Floyd type song. And this tells you you're in for something different. This is not your typical Billy Talent album. Now, song number 2 is one of their singles, Reckless Paradise. And that sounds like the Billy Talent that you know and love. Now, I've always liked Billy Talent. I enjoy almost every song I've ever heard from them. I'm familiar with all their albums, but I'd never consider myself a super fan until this album. I mean, this album just blew me away. I've been recommending it to people all year long, and I liked it so much that I actually bought tickets to go see them live. I saw them with Rise Against in Ottawa, and They were amazing. The sound was great. The songs were great. Ben's vocals and performance and energy were awesome. The backup vocals from Ian were masterful. His guitar playing was super tasty. Bass playing was groovy. And I had a pleasant surprise. I look at the drummer, and normally it's Jordan Hastings. And I look and I'm thinking, this looks like Lowell Campbell, who's the drummer for my favorite band here, Winter Sleep. And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then later on in the show, Ben said, I'd like you guys to welcome our new friend Lowell. So it was indeed Lowell Campbell. So I thought that was pretty cool that my favorite band of all time, their drummer was filling in while Jordan Hastings was out on tour with Alexisonfire. Now, I actually have a little bit of insider information here. I was lucky enough to do an interview on episode number 79 of the podcast with Jordan Gauthier, who is at the forefront of all things drums in Canada, whether it's as a drum tech or manufacturing or repairs or rentals, anything, people go to Jordan. He's the man. And he worked on this Billy Talent album. So he gave us a little bit of insider information about the recording process when it came to the drums. So here are some words from Jordan Gauthier. He says, "This was the wildest drum teching experience that I've ever had in the studio. I've never brought so much drum gear before, which was 2 vanfuls. Ian DeSaw is a freak about tones, not just guitar, but also drums, and he has an amazing ear. I've been a part of many records, and what stands out to me was how the people involved in the making of this album were so into the nerdiness of the drums. Bigger acts normally record all the drums for an album in 3 to 5 days. Billy Talent recorded just 1 drum track per day. We'd line up 20 snare drums. I'd hit each of them. We'd go 3 hours through the snares and then on to the cymbals. We'd spend 6 hours to figure out drum tones. Then Ratbeard, Jordan Hastings, their drummer, would bang out a few takes and they'd use the best one. Just an hour and a half of drumming for the 6 hours of chasing tones. It was such a cool experience. Everyone involved was flattering with comments. When the record came out, I listened to it for a few days because I was so proud and the journey was so cool. I think it's an awesome record." So that's Jordan Gauthier. So Billy Talent's drummer, Jordan Hastings, actually plays drums on another album coming up on this Best Albums of 2022 list. So we'll check that out in a second. And if you were just going to check out 3 songs from the album to see if it's for you, I would recommend the 3 singles. So End of Me, Reckless Paradise, and I Beg to Differ. The second great album that I heard in 2022 was Jack White's Fear of the Dawn. Now, Jack White released not 1, but 2 full-length albums that year. He had Fear of the Dawn, which is more of a rock sound, and he had Entering Heaven Alive, which was more of an acoustic folk sound. And what's crazy is at the end of the year, I saw a list of, I believe, the 20 most critically acclaimed albums of the year, and both of his albums were in the top 20, which is just wild. So I want to read to you the list of instruments that Jack White plays on this album: vocals, drums, guitar, bass, synthesizers, percussion, theremin, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, samples, piano, and vibraphone. So this is a man of multiple talents. And this is a thick and dense album that requires repeated listening. So this actually, I dove into this in April when it was released, and it went over my head. You can't get it all at once. And it took me listening to it from April all the way through to December before I added it to the best albums of the year list. It's crazy. I can't picture any other musician being able to pull off this album or being able to write these songs or come up with these riffs. And the way that I would describe it is, it sounds like Jack White is playing guitar from the future or from another planet. The sounds that he gets with his guitar are just ridiculous. It's like hard to comprehend. So I would recommend putting on a good pair of headphones if you're into guitar. you have to listen to this album. This guy is pushing the limits, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. He's doing things nobody else nobody else is even attempting to do. And maybe you hear an album and there's one really cool riff on the album or one cool riff every few songs. He takes an album's worth of amazing riffs and finds a way to put an album's worth of amazing riffs into one song, and he does it on almost every song. It's crazy. Anyways, if you only have time to listen to 3 songs to know whether you like this or not, I would recommend Taking Me Back, Fear of the Dawn, and Into the Twilight. Another great album released last year is Dashboard Confessional's All the Truth That I Can Tell. Now, I used to listen to Dashboard back in the day when they released their albums, A Mark, A Mission, A Brand, A Scar, as well as Dusk and Summer. So it made my heart happy to hear a great album from the band released in 2022. Now, I remember the first time I listened to this album, I was lying on the couch, I put on a good pair of headphones, and I was just going to listen to a couple songs. And I ended up being so captivated and enthralled and mesmerized by this album that I listened to it in its entirety in that one shot. This is a collection of beautiful songs, intricate and tasty guitar work. The vocals are super present and super clean. It sounds like the singer is right there in the same room or in your head. The lyrics are incredible. To me, most albums get put together where the musicians come up with music first, and then they figure out the melody of where the vocals would go, and then eventually they fill in lyrics that work with the song. This feels to me like the lyrics were of the utmost importance, and they actually built the songs and the music around the lyrics. It feels like the lyrics were done, and then they fleshed everything out with music. A great example is the song called Sleep In. So it's 2.5 minutes, and it's so descriptive that it's like a short movie scene. So the singer with the lyrics is describing this scene, and you can just picture it unfolding like he placed a movie in front of you. So if you're going to check out 3 songs, check out that song, Sleep In, All the Truth I Can Tell, and Burning Heart. The next great album that I listened to in 2022 is by The Congregation, and the album is called The Ugly Truth. So this is a side project for Clayton Bellamy. So he's a member of the platinum country group, the Roadhammers. The greatest compliment that I can give for this album is if you're a fan of Queens of the Stone Age, their all-time great album, Songs for the Deaf. If you like that album, you'll love this album. It's 6 songs. So, he gets in, he kicks your ass, and he gets out. There's amazing music videos for 2 of the singles. So we have Lie to Me and Soundtrack to the End of the World. You want to check out those 2 music videos to get a visual accompaniment of what they're going for with this. So he's a character, the preacher man. He's preaching the gospel of rock and roll and love and all those things. And the third song I would recommend to check out is called The Ugly Truth. And I actually was able to do a 2-hour deep dive with Clayton Bellamy back on episode number 69 of the podcast. And he sent in some words about this album. Clayton says, "This album was recorded almost completely virtual. My producer in London, England, Dan Weller, and my producer in Edmonton, Dan Davidson, each worked independently in their studios, and I worked in mine in Northern Alberta. We were in complete lockdown using audio movers and FaceTime and Zoom to make this album, and I'm so proud of the way it turned out." The 5th great album released in 2022 is Nas's King's Disease 3. So the album received widespread critical acclaim from critics when it was released, and it was Nas's 16th top 10 album on the Billboard Top 200 charts. So this is a record he now shares with his once rival, Jay-Z. So I'm going to be honest, I haven't heard King's Disease 1 or 2, but I can tell you that King's Disease 3 can stand on its own as an amazing album. It has great production. It has memorable beats. Nas is at the top of his game. He's got all these super clever one-liners. And NME magazine agrees with me. They say with King's Disease 3, the New York rapper has put the seal on a strong album trilogy that proves that 3 decades in, he's still a force to be reckoned with. And if you're going to check out just 3 songs, start with Ghetto, Legit, and Once a Man, Twice a Child. The sixth great album that I listened to in 2022 is Death Cab for Cutie's Asphalt, Meadows. Now, I've been a fan of the band since their 2003 album Transatlanticism, and I have to say they might be one of the most consistent bands on the planet because every album I've heard from there since 2003 has been really solid. And one thing that always stands out to me is the production on these albums. Put on a good pair of headphones, and there's just so much thought, so much time and effort that's gone into the production side, not just capturing the songs or capturing the performances, but songs flow from one end to the next. There's little things of atmosphere that are added, little sounds, a little bit of ear candy. It's a journey when you listen to a Death Cab for Cutie album. And the singer is such a unique lyricist. He's very poetic. He's very descriptive. He might be one of my all-time favorite lyricists, just in how unique he is. And every time you hear Death Cab, you know it's Death Cab because of the vocals as well as the lyrics. The band actually wrote nearly 90 songs for this album and then narrowed it down to the final 11 that you're hearing on the album. And I have a few words here from critics that agree with me that this is a great album. So Spin says it's their best album in years. Pop Matters considers it a mid-career triumph, writing that it doesn't merely repeat the melancholy of their work in the early aughts. Instead, it expands and deepens their signature sound without abandoning it. And All Music says, for a group so deep into their career, the album sounds surprisingly urgent and revitalized. Energetic highlights abound. If you're going to start with just 3 songs, check out Rand McNally, I Don't Know How to Survive, and Roman Candles. And the next one is by the band Moist, and the album is called End of the Ocean. If you are a fan of bass and if you are a fan of harmonies, this is the album for you. For harmonies, this is a masterclass in harmonies. I mean, the biggest hooks on the album are when the harmonies come in, and they are super tasty. And when it comes to bass, a lot of times bass is a little hidden in the mix. It's there more as a feeling. You can feel the bass. But in this case, the bass is right up front. You can hear every note that's being played. It actually provides a lot of hooks in the songs. It's a very crisp, clear recording and mix of the bass. I think you'll enjoy it if you're a fan of the bass. And I can say that this is one of the best albums of Moist's career. This stands up there at the very top with their iconic album Creature right here. And I was fortunate enough to sit down with bass player Jeff Pierce of Moist back on episode number 60 of the podcast. And I reached out to him and I let him know that his album was on the best albums of the year list. And he provided some behind the scenes info about the recording of the album. And this is what he says. Thanks, Joel, for including our record in your list. It was 30 years ago this month that we recorded the demo tape that would form the basis of our first record, and we are so happy to still be a part of the conversation. We had a very specific idea for what we wanted End of the Ocean to be. We wanted it to have the energy of the band live, so we are hoping to record the record that way. But we had just finished recording the drums when the pandemic shut everything down, and we all returned to our homes in different cities. Our guitarist, Mark, who produced the record, had an idea that if we all set up small studios in our homes, we could finish the record remotely. Each day, he would have a list of items for each of us to do. His morning text to me might be, record backup vocals for We Are. Need a new bass take on Ammunition with less attack. Maybe try some mandolin on High on it. Then Mark took all the pieces we recorded separately and stitched it into the record. I think, in the end, that it actually does capture the sound of the band playing live, even though it wasn't recorded that way at all. If you're going to check out just 3 songs from the album, check out Party's Over, Tarantino, and End of the Ocean. The 8th great album that I listened to in 2022 is by Coheed and Cambria, and as has come to be expected, there is an epic title for this album. It is called Vaxis, Act 2, A Window of the Waking Mind. So this is a concept album that continues the Armory War storyline. And singer Claudio Sanchez, he said that the band emphasized working without limitations and taking risks rather than just giving the fans what they want. And a lot of this album was written before the pandemic, but once the pandemic broke out, a lot of the themes started to sound, insensitive, or they would get misconstrued. So they had to go back and rework some of the lyrics and themes on the album. If you're familiar with Coheed and Cambria, then you know that their music always sounds epic. There's this epicness to it, and you're going to get that on this album. This album is very different musically. There's a wide range of sounds and genres. So there's pop, metal, rock, there's ballads, acoustic, piano, strings. And to me, the highlight, normally a Coheed album, the highlight is the guitar. And there's some cool guitar stuff here. There's some solos and some riffs. But to me, what stands out is actually the drums on this album. The drums are masterful. The drums steal the show. There's really original and unique stuff going on with the drums. They sound amazing the way that they were recorded. So check out the drums on this album. And if you're going to check out just 3 songs, check out Beautiful Losers, Comatose, and Shoulders. We've made it to the 9th and final great album of last year. This is by Alexisonfire. The album is called Otherness, and this is their first album in 13 years. So this is a big deal. And I was able to get 2 special guests that are going to help me out in talking about this album. And they're going to share why it is that this album came to be, what happened that allowed everybody to come together and make a new album, which was not a part of the plan. I go so far back with Alexisonfire that I saw them in the early 2000s at Babylon in Ottawa in front of maybe 300 people. And then a few years later at the London Music Hall in front of 1,000 people. And a few years after that at the Ottawa Civic Centre with the Used, and there was 2,000 or 3,000 people. Then at a festival in Toronto, there's 10,000 or 15,000 people. And I just saw them last summer in Ottawa at Blues Fest. They were one of the headliners, and there was like 30,000 or 40,000 people, just to show the progression that they've made over the years, becoming one of Canada's best, biggest, most beloved bands. One thing that's pretty wild is on Metacritic, the album has a 92% average review score, which makes it actually the 2nd highest rated album of the year, period. Out of the thousands of albums released in 2022, it's the 2nd highest rated. And to give you some perspective, the front runner this year to win the Album of the Year award at the Grammys is Beyonce with her album Renaissance, which has a 91% review score. Now, I was able to get not one, but both of the recording engineers that recorded this album with Alexisonfire, and they have some amazing behind the scenes information. So up first, we have Jill Zimmerman, who is one of the 2 recording engineers. And this is what Jill has to say. Glad to hear their album made it. The majority of the record was done in 7 days with only a few days for overdubs, and the constant flow of creativity was ecstatic. I had to always be record ready because instead of recording a million takes, they knew when it was the right one, and there wasn't much editing on it at all. Pretty much just raw talent from the guys. Well, also Darren and my talent to capture their magic, of course. So that's Jill Zimmerman. She mentioned Darren in there, who's the other recording engineer. And here's what Darren had to say. This is a long one, so stick with me. The song Blue Spade was actually written by the bass player Steele, who has never written an Alexisonfire song before. It's a deeply personal song that's resonated with a lot of people. Blue Spade is also the first song George sings, which was sort of a serendipitous thing that happened in the studio. It wasn't rehearsed or planned ahead of time. Sans Soleil was actually written by Wade, but many have assumed Dallas wrote it because he's singing all of the lead vocals on it. The most magical thing about the album is it was recorded in February of 2021 when the world was very locked down. We all got tested, cleared, then shacked up in the studio for 2 weeks. Many people in the crew had not been around any people in a long time, so it was a very cool experience in that sense. The album never would have happened if it wasn't for lockdowns. So that's looked at as a small silver lining within all the negative aspects of the lockdown. It's the only way that all of the guys in the band were able to be home and grounded and not occupied with life or other musical projects. The guitar solo for Blue Spade is a trade-off, with Dallas going first, then Wade midway through to the end. It was all recorded live at the same time on the studio floor, with the volume so loud it was actually bleeding into the guitar's pickups. There's a cool ghosting effect that came out of the result. We were all stoked when it happened. I could go on and on and on, but hopefully that gives you some juicy bits that nobody knows about, because I've never talked about it until now. So that's Darren Magarowski, recording engineer on the album. And if you're going to check out just 3 songs, check out Sans Soleil, Mistaken Information, and Committed to the Con. So there you have it, my top 9 albums of 2022. I hope you agree with some of my picks, but reach out to me and let me know, do you agree with those picks? Do you disagree with those picks? What amazing albums were released in 2022 that I missed completely? Please let me know. I'm always looking for amazing new music to listen to. Reach out to me on social media, and I'll see you on the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.